Hi, y'all. Welcome to the live stream tonight. We have a ton to cover. First and foremost, we have two jurors from the Lori Vallow Daybell trial who have spoken out. And surprisingly, they both were not sure at the beginning of deliberations what they would do on every single count. They weren't absolutely sure. And for different reasons. I think it's really going to surprise you. But both of them use the exact same word to describe this whole situation: evil. They called it evil. We've also heard some very strong and heartfelt statements from the families, and I want to go through what those are. And we have a note on the Brian Koberger, Idaho 4 college student murders case. So I also want to get into that briefly and tell you a little bit about what's happening there. So let's get started with the jurors that we heard from. There were two of them. The first was Tiffany. She actually was an alternate juror, and Law and Crime interviewed her. A really good, thorough interview. It was fascinating. Now, she said her impression of the case as she heard about it, because she didn't know a lot about it. The judge, of course, made sure that the people who served on the jury were not deeply steeped and already knew a lot of information about it, or at least a lot of rumors about it. So she said her impression was, this is just so bizarre. And that's pretty accurate. I would say that was a pretty good description. She was asked about and talked about whether or not the defendant's demeanor matters, whether the way Lori was acting made a difference. And you bet it does. It definitely matters how the defendant acts and what the defendant does. And this particular alternate juror said she looked at Lori Vallow Daybell 95% of the time because she was shocked to hear what was coming out, and she wanted to know how Lori Vallow Daybell would react, which is exactly what you would figure she would do. So she talked about her behavior in court and being surprised by that, because for the most part, she said she never saw emotion on her face. That she looked at us a couple of times, meaning the jury, she looked at us a couple of times, but mostly just showed no emotion at what was happening. So she was asked, okay, what would you have done in the case? You were an alternate, so you got sent home. And I can imagine that would be very, very frustrating. These are 18 poor souls who sat through some of the most difficult testimony, things that frankly were spared, like autopsy photographs and really gruesome photographs or depictions of things that we didn't have to see in the public. She had to see all of those. And then at the end was told, never mind, go on home. You're not actually going to serve on the jury. But I will tell you this, what she did really mattered. What those 6 alternates did really mattered, because the chances that all 18 people would make it all the way through were very small. It was critically important that they be there. So, but she said she definitely would have convicted Lori, but would there have been a holdup or something she was at least thinking about? And she said, yeah, one charge she would have needed to deliberate a little longer on was the whole issue of Tammy Daybell. And that was, of course, one that a lot of people talked about was the evidence strong enough to connect Lori to Tammy Daybell's death? Lori said she had an alibi. She said, I was in Hawaii when she was killed. What could I possibly have had to do with it? And the state, of course, their position was, look, this isn't about you actually holding a pillow over her mouth or whatever it was, but that instead this is about conspiracy to murder, like everybody working together to create a plan and to execute it to murder Tammy Daybell. So she said that the juror said she believed Chad had a heavier hand in Tammy Daybell's death. And I think that has to be obvious because he was present at the home when she died. Lori, and so the interviewer, Jesse Weber from Law and Crime, asked her, okay, what about that night when somebody tried to shoot at Tammy Daybell, went running off, someone wearing a mask and carrying what Tammy Daybell thought was a paintball gun, came in and tried to shoot Tammy Daybell as she was unloading groceries out of her car one evening, just 9 days or so before her actual murder. And the juror said, look, and let me go a little more into detail about what it was that Jesse Weber asked. He said, what about that night of the shooting? Because remember, Lori was in Missouri, and Lori was doing a casting on Tammy. Casting meaning she was trying to get rid of an evil spirit named Viola, which Chad, Lori believed occupied and possessed Tammy Daybell. And so during the middle of this casting with some other women like Zulema, who then testified about this, Lori got on the phone with somebody, and Zulema didn't know who it was, but Lori got off the phone while on the phone said, idiot, moron, and then gets off the phone and says, and gets what Zulema called scary angry, and says, idiot, can't do anything right by himself. The defense made the prosecution made a strong argument that was an example of Lori being involved, that she knew that Alex Cox, the person that the prosecution says shot at Tammy Daybell, was going to try to kill her that night. It didn't work. They had to do something different, but the prosecution believes that was a murder attempt and that Lori knew about it, that she was fully aware of it, and that's why she was doing this casting, and that's why she got on the phone and said idiot and moron. So the defense, as the juror pointed out, made a strong argument in closing that there really wasn't a lot of physical evidence to even suggest that Tammy was actually murdered, as opposed to that they wanted her dead, which I think they presented several text messages that showed they believed she was near death, and that Chad Daybell seemed to think that was a really good thing, that they both did. So what the juror concluded was, look, I would have come around on Tammy Daybell, but I wanted to talk about it a little because I had some reservations. Like, I wanted to make sure from the persuasive talking of everybody in the jury pool, or everybody on the jury, that everybody agreed with that everybody thought, and that we all agreed that Tammy Daybell was also someone that Lori conspired to murder, not just the two children. So, but you don't have to have a hold up at all in liking this video and in subscribing. It's absolutely free, and it really helps the channel. We are trying to get to 100,000, and we are getting really, really close. So thank you so much to all the people who have already subscribed. And if you haven't, just hit that button. She was asked, the juror was, what do you think was the best evidence? And what Tiffany said was, she gave several examples of what she thought amounted to really persuasive evidence. One thing was, she said the money motivator, that Lori didn't get the $1 million when Charles Vallow died from his life insurance policy, because he had very wisely switched the beneficiary to his sister, Kay Woodcock. And so she then, according to the juror, felt like prepped for Tylee's death by switching the Social Security funds. The Social Security funds, up until July, went directly to Tylee's bank account, but starting in August, they went to the bank account of Lori. And then, of course, in September, Tylee was murdered. So, and this is an example. I've been thinking about what are some of the things that we talked about. Okay, what else could the defense have presented? Here's one example. I think there was a little bit of misunderstanding around these funds and what they were exactly, because these funds aren't really Tylee's funds, as in Tylee's fund where she can just spend it on whatever or go out and have fun. These are funds to raise a child whose parent has died. It's a way of getting the Social Security benefits to the child. It's actually unusual to give them directly to an underage child. Typically, it's like not fund money from the government. It's money that would go to the parent and would be used to raise and for the benefit of the child. It's a way of providing some support for the child. So, and let me show you what the Social Security Administration says about these benefits. It says, these benefits provide necessities for eligible family members and help make it possible for those children to complete school. And by the way, they're talking about high school, not college. They're talking about high school. When a parent develops a disability or dies, Social Security benefits help stabilize the family's financial future. And so I think that since most kids don't, under that age, don't have a checking account and certainly aren't used to paying bills, it's pretty common that it would go into the adult's bank account, although it is to be used for the benefit of the child. That's the point of it, not just for spending money for the parent either. So it wasn't all that strange to have it go to Lori's account. I think the juror correctly noted, though, that it was changed, and that was a little odd. Why? Why was it changed? And we frankly don't know, because no one who would know testified. Was Tylee irresponsible financially? We definitely didn't get that vibe. In fact, we got the opposite vibe. And was it punishment of her? Was it control? Lori wanted to control it. We don't really know the answer to that. It may have been pre-planning for murder, but personally, I didn't think that that was a definite sure thing. It's reasonable to believe that Lori was involved in the murder, but I'm not sure that money was at the top of the list. I would say it'd be more convenient and also religion. I don't think they objected to keeping that money. That pretty much was important to them. So I thought, and another point of evidence that she talked about was really important. I totally agreed with her, where she said the texts about the death percentages and the evil spirits for the kids were really important. There was July of 2019, you may remember, when Chad wrote that Hillary, which was supposedly the evil spirit in Tylee, was at a 0.13, meaning very near death. And he said, I turned up the pain to 10 and placed a spiritual virus in her. And JJ, is at 99.99, which also was near death, somewhat confusing. And said that Raphael, which was a nickname Chad used for himself, had visited JJ and told him to follow Amy into the light. In other words, to die. I also assured him that James would love and take care of his mommy, which he will with all of his heart and soul. James was another name Chad called himself. And Lori's response, despite the fact that Chad has just said he's urged her son to go into death and that he's turned up the pain on her daughter, Lori's response is, that is so sweet, apparently referring to the fact that Chad's going to take care of her, as opposed to Tylee and JJ. And then there was the July 30th text message where Chad said, Tammy's very close. Her percentage has fallen steadily since Hiplo's left. It's encouraging. And Lori said, what's the percentage now? What about JJ's too? And Chad said, Tammy is at 3, JJ is at 2. And Lori was like, 2 and 3%, not 0. And just the whole expression of that is so off. It just wasn't near enough to 0 and death for Lori. And so I agreed with her that those text messages were very strong evidence for the prosecution. The juror felt like Tiffany did that Lori was encouraging her brother Alex Cox to do harm. And she believed that Alex ultimately killed the kids, fingerprints on the bag, phone in the area, but was carrying out Lori's orders. He was doing what she wanted to do. And she also believed that possibly Lori she was asked, she didn't believe this. She asked, well, is it possible that Lori didn't know? Is it possible that Chad and Alex went off, killed the kids, and Lori had no clue? And she talked about, I thought that this was very, very attentive because it really went to the detail of one of the pieces of evidence. She said, well, Chad talked about there being a plan. And then she encouraged her brother. So I don't know if she knew exactly what happened, but she knew there was a plan. She was involved in that. And here's a text message, and this may be the one she was referring to, where Lori said, do you think there's a perfectly orchestrated plan to take the children and we just have to wait for it to be carried out? I feel lost, like I should be doing something to help. Let's help God along, shall we? Let's help him take these children. And Chad says, yes, he's at 0. There is a plan being orchestrated for the children. I was shown last night, but it's been taken away from my mind, of course. And then he says, cheek to cheek, loin to loin. It isn't very far away, my love. And Lori responds, I can't wait. Literally cannot wait. I have no patience. I want you now. The juror also was impressed by Lori's hair being on the duct tape around JJ. That was an important piece of evidence. She was asked about that, and she said that she thought the defense had a pretty solid argument about a mother's hair could be found on clothing and in the bodily fluids displaced that might have displaced it in the bag and gotten it on the duct tape. So she didn't see that as an ultimate piece of evidence. I thought that was very fair because it really showed she was thinking logically about the evidence and listening to both sides. I was impressed by that. Although personally, to me, I thought the hair was pretty persuasive. I did think that was really effective cross-examination by the defense. It was very practical. It didn't require any expert testimony. It just made a lot of logical sense. And I think the fact that mothers resonated with that, like, yeah, that's probably true. My hair might be on the clothing. I think it just made sense to a lot of people. So the juror also talked about the fact that the judge had made it very clear in advance that they might not get a smoking gun, that there wasn't going to be a "kill my kids, Alex, would you" kind of text message. But there was enough circumstantial evidence she believed that Lori planned and encouraged the murders, and that was the standard they were to find. I thought, again, that was impressive because it requires a juror who's really listened to what the judge said and paid very careful attention to the actual analysis and paying attention to all the details about what had been said. She also was asked about those phone calls. The phone calls were, all of them took place after the fact. There was the phone call from Chad to Lori in jail, the phone call from Summer Shiflett to Lori in jail. Summer Shiflett was the sister of Lori. And then the phone call from Colby Ryan, who was Lori's living son, to Lori while she was in prison. All three prison calls. And what the juror noticed about those phone calls was there being zero emotion from Lori Vallow Daybell. That the other person in every case, well, maybe not quite Chad, but I would say he was more emotional than Lori, but that the other person was very emotional. Certainly Summer was, and certainly Colby was, but Lori was not. Lori was very calm. And the witness said she stands by her story. It just seemed really bizarre that to have zero emotion about your kids and losing your relationship with your sister, with your living son, it seemed like a situation where you would expect to have emotion. She also gave a very thoughtful analysis, I think, about manipulation. She said she does believe that Chad manipulated Lori into this, but Lori was a manipulator as well. Lori manipulated Alex to do what she wanted him to do. And she said, of all of them, being manipulated does not get you off the hook. And I think also that Lori manipulated Chad to some extent. For example, asking, when is Tammy's death percentage going to get to zero? And at one point, Chad said to Lori, "My love for you is overflowing. I just want to hold you endlessly. You're my wonderful best friend that I can't live without." This is just days, like 3 days after Charles Vallow was shot, supposedly in self-defense by Alex Cox. And Lori says to Chad, he's just said, "I can't live without you." And she says, "And yet you are. So sad. Missing you, just landed, got to get to work." And clearly that was a little dig at the fact that her spouse was gone, but his was not. And so he was living without her because of that. Tiffany, the juror, was also very surprised at the lack of defense and how little defense there was on behalf of Lori Vallow Daybell. And we talked about that here on the channel and in the chat. She said she'd watched the very effective defense with Casey Anthony. And so she was sort of expecting more, that she was surprised there weren't some witnesses that supported that she was manipulated by Chad, which I think Lori may not have permitted those witnesses, or maybe a psych eval for her, that the closing arguments were great, but it was kind of too little too late. She was just expecting more by them. Now, I want to get to a question that Pretty Pearls put in the chat early on. She asked me, okay, what about sealed records and witnesses? Does that make it more difficult for the defense to defend his or her client? And that's a great question because we have all kinds of cases recently where certain documents or information has been sealed. We've seen that over and over. We've seen that in the Brian Kohberger Moscow murders case. We've seen it here where lots of stuff was locked down. We saw some of that in the Murdoch case as well. Although the trial was broadcast, many things were sealed in advance. So usually when something is sealed, it means sealed as to the public. So that means you and I don't get to see it, but it doesn't mean that the defense does not get to see it in advance of trial in order to prepare. It certainly shouldn't be working that way. Nothing should be, if it's important information that would have anything to do with whether the defendant is guilty, it's supposed to be shown to the defendant and to the defense counsel before trial. So as far as the sealed records mattered to the trial, then that should have been something the defense saw and was allowed to use to prepare. So I don't think it would have made a difference to the preparation or to the defense in this case. I also see Bobby Cat asking me about looking into the dates of the people, all of the people in this case, were killed and how they coincided with sacrificial days on the satanic calendar. Wow. I have no idea, Bobby Cat. That's interesting. I didn't know I didn't know there was a satanic calendar, to be honest. So I don't know the answer to that, but it certainly sounds, to be honest, frightening, very, very frightening. So thanks for your question. Now, the juror was also asked, do you think it would have helped if Lori had testified? Would it have made a difference if she had gotten on the stand? And I think the juror pretty wisely said, well, I don't know. What would she have said? That would have been the key question. What would she have said? And she said, we obviously knew from the first questionnaire that the defendant does not have to testify, that there's no requirement that they testify. We were well aware that it's not required. And so, you know, what would she have said? Would she maybe have thrown Chad under the bus, or maybe Alex? Or would she have said, I'm not the one who gave orders to harm my kids? It depends. It all depends on what she would have said as to whether it would have helped her. And then she was asked about, well, what about that really, really hard evidence that you had to look at, that the photos, the difficult facts about the burning of Tylee, for example, and how the body was found, that just horrendous stuff. And she said she tried to hide her tears because she felt that she should not show emotion. I don't know if that's really true, but it probably is a more professional way of handling it if you can as a juror. But she said she did see other jurors crying at times, and her word for this was pure evil. She just thought it was pure evil. And I think that's a fair description about what happened. She was also asked about motive. What do you think was behind all of this? And she said she thought it was part religious beliefs and the thought that they were higher powers, but she also really believed that money had a lot to do with it. And she thought that the fact that other people would have taken, numerous people said, if we'd known you were going to kill them, we'd have gladly taken the children just to avoid their death. And so she said, the fact that they never did that when other people would have taken the kids suggests that financial really matters. I do think about that statement by Lori when Summer Shiflett said to her, I would have taken them. Why didn't you, give the children to me? And Lori said, oh, sure, everybody says that now, which since they never asked anybody to take them is a pretty lame argument. But I have thought about that statement by Lori. The juror also was asked about the Charles Vallow shooting and death. And of course, as we all know, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute too, Lori Vallow Daybell is charged with conspiracy to murder Charles Vallow. Charles was married to Lori at the time. Although he had filed for divorce, that was on hold. They were married. He was shot by Alex Cox, at least according to what Tylee and Lori and Alex said. And they all claimed it was self-defense. But now Arizona will be prosecuting Lori for the death of Charles Vallow for conspiracy to murder Charles Vallow. So the question was, do you think she plotted to kill him? And the witness felt like she didn't really have all the evidence to know that. I was a little bit surprised by that because I felt like they probably, I mean, they went into a lot of detail. They brought a ton of witnesses from Arizona to talk about that. So I thought that might be a little bit of a caution for Arizona. If she had some questions about it, they better fill in some holes because I don't think they held back. I think they brought what they had. Perhaps I'm wrong. I really did think the Brandon Boudreaux evidence was even stronger, and we will get to that issue as well. So she was asked about, oh, and this is huge. If Alex and Chad had been in the same case, if they had also been being tried and you'd had to decide, would you have had enough evidence to convict both of them? And her answer was, oh, yes. Hugely important for Chad, right? And for Chad's defense team, because this is a statement that we believe the evidence, the exact evidence we've already heard, was enough to convict Chad of all of these exact same counts. Chad's team had better be sitting up and listening. Chad had better be sitting up and listening. This suggests that Chad needs to do whatever he can to strike a deal, however bad it may be, because this witness felt, juror, oh, yes, there was clearly enough to implicate Alex and to implicate Chad. Alex, of course, is deceased, so there will be no trial related to Alex. She also made a really great point. She said it was so odd to her that there was this love connection for the ages that they believed they had, but divorce wasn't an option. Yet, murder was. Not divorce. That would be wrong. That would be wrong. But murder, well, sometimes you gotta. So she talked about JJ's death and the fact that Alex was on the property of Chad Daybell for such a short time. And yet there was a several foot deep grave for JJ. There was a piece of plywood. There were white rocks arranged on top of him. And yet Alex was only on the property for 17 minutes. And she said, well, the grave would have taken longer than that. And that was definitely one of the points made. So he had to have had help. And she said, I can probably guess who that would be. And I wanted Jesse to say, well, who? But I assumed she meant Chad. But I also felt like Lori was possibly involved in that burial, not in digging the grave, I'm sure, but in that burial in a way that she was not with Tylee. Because just the fact, I could not conceivably bring myself to call that loving, but maybe ceremonial. It was more ceremonial, the way the white rocks, it just seemed like kind of a woman's touch, maybe like something that Lori would have done, because she did seem to have more an positive emotional connection with JJ than with Tylee. And so it just seemed maybe more planned, I guess would be another way to put that. But I agree. I don't think Lori was out there digging the grave in advance or anything. So I guess at least Chad or maybe Alex did it earlier and then had it all ready to go. Now, the second juror to talk to a news outlet was Saul Hernandez. He was an actual juror, as the woman I just talked about, Tiffany, was an alternate juror. That means these were her own thoughts, but she didn't sit and share thoughts with the other members of the jury because she was sent home. Saul Hernandez did, and he interviewed with ABC News. That was a disappointingly short interview, I thought, frustratingly so. But he had some really interesting points. He said he was the lone holdout on another issue, not Tammy, which the first alternate juror was. She wasn't a holdout. She just said she wanted to discuss that one. That was the place where she had a little bit of question. He had problems with Tylee and whether or not Lori should be held liable for murdering Tylee. He said there wasn't significant evidence of what happened to her. In fact, the prosecution warned about that in jury questioning and in opening statement and every time they could, that it wasn't clear what happened to Tylee. Her body had been basically destroyed, and so it wasn't absolutely sure, but that she clearly had been murdered, and they believed they had circumstantial evidence that Lori was part and parcel of that. So the juror was saying that, there was less of a connection to Lori, and the things that I thought about that did connect Lori, I just was sort of thinking to myself. First of all, the prosecution argued there was this pattern where someone would be occupied by, and first they would turn dark, then they would be occupied by an evil spirit, turn into a zombie, and then the body had to be killed. And that happened for several people. So while it may have been less obvious at the time Tylee was killed, it had already happened to Charles, it was going to happen to JJ, it was going to happen to Tammy, and there were indications that they tried to do the same thing with Brandon Boudreaux. And the prosecution says that pattern, the fact that this fits in, makes it part and parcel of it. I think there were a couple of text messages too that were important. Back all the way in July on the 18th, Chad wrote that Hillary, that evil spirit supposedly in Tylee, was at 0.13, and then he turned up the pain in her to 10 and placed a spiritual virus in Tylee. So that, I think, was a clear connection of that pattern, at least, to Tylee. And then there was also something on the 23rd, a text message where Lori wrote to Chad and said, Tylee's being super sweet and helpful, and she cleaned her room. See if she got switched. Totally not her. And Chad said, yes, she was switched. Please let me know when you can talk, and I will explain it. So again, that pulled Tylee in to some degree. Those were the only two I saw related to Tylee prior that were in my timeline, and I easily could have missed some. There easily could be many more than that. But those were the two I had in my timeline that related to Tylee before her death. But that means that there was some doubt, at least in one person's mind, one potential juror, on Tammy and on an actual juror on Tylee. That doesn't mean, obviously, this juror came to the conclusion that Lori Vallow Daybell was guilty, that she was guilty on every count, and that's what's supposed to happen. The jury gets together, they discuss it, they decide together. Not just one person's opinion, but the group discusses it and comes to a conclusion. So they had open minds, they were ready to discuss it. That is exactly the way a jury is supposed to work. The juror was asked by the ABC News reporter, do you think she believed she really was an apostle in an apocalyptic doomsday cult? Do you think she was a true believer? And he said, yeah. He thought it started with curiosity, but when Chad got involved, she went along with it. And that, yeah, she was a true believer. You know, interestingly, the evidence he said that bothered him the most was not some of the really disgusting, horrible photographs of the bodies of the children, but it was the photographs of Chad and Lori at their wedding in Hawaii. He said that was disgusting. He said that he could not understand how you could be that happy when your kids are in the ground and the person that was key in all of this is sitting across from you and smiling at you and dancing with you on the beach. He said it became harder to even look at her through the trial. And he said, using the exact same word that Tiffany, the alternate juror, did, he said, I think for the first time in my life, I put a face to evil. Same word, evil. That is a really strong word, and they both used it in connection with Lori Vallow Daybell and this particular case. Then go back to what he just said that I read to you. I tried to type it as close as I could get. That this is more bad news for Chad when you think about it, because here's what he said. How could you be that happy when your kids are in the ground and the person that was key in all of this is sitting across from you and smiling at you and dancing with you on the beach? That means this juror thought that Chad Daybell was key in all of this, the person that was key in all of this. So this juror was also definitely ready to commit Chad Daybell. Again, huge note for Chad Daybell's defense team. This jury believed Chad Daybell was guilty, seeing exactly the evidence that can be presented in Chad's case. Perhaps there are other things that they didn't use, but definitely this evidence should be able to be presented. And here's what they concluded. Now, we've heard from 2 jurors so far, and that's it of the 18. But we've also heard from some of the family members, and they had some very heartfelt messages. We heard from Tylee's aunt, Annie Cushing, and some of this is very emotional and deep. Here's what Annie Cushing said. She said, I was surprised by how I felt when I saw her. Like I was expecting more rage and just like, how dare you? But she looked like an animal caught in a trap. it was just a realization, in addition to these lives that she helped to destroy, and it just the ripple effect of people's lives that have been impacted by these crimes. Yeah, I walked away with the realization she also took herself down. Wow, I thought that was very deep. And she said, and I thought through, like, if there's anything I would want to say to her, it would fall on deaf ears. See, she's a psychopath. She has no concern whatsoever about the pain and suffering she's caused other people. Kay and Larry Woodcock, who were JJ's grandparents, who both became very beloved through their heartfelt pursuit of justice. First, to find JJ, to get somebody to check on him, to get somebody to figure out where he was, and then to get justice for him. And Larry just said, I want to personally thank and I want to personally hug every one of those jurors. And Kay said it's the most bittersweet you can imagine, which I bet it was. Just the sadness, but the relief from all of this is, I guess, a liberating feeling. It just is freeing for us. I do believe, since it's Mother's Day weekend, the Friday before, and I do believe that the verdicts today are just everybody and everything aligned in the universe, and this is what you call poetic justice. I thought those were very moving comments, I guess would be my word. Rex Connor, who was Lori's uncle, I've been telling you and mentioning this interview that I saw, so I found a quote from that. I believe it was before the verdict had come back. He is Lori's uncle, brother to Lori's mother. And he said that Lori's mother talks to her every week in prison. And he made this comment in an interview outside the courtroom. He attended some days of the trial, and he said, you're in the courtroom, you make eye contact with Lori, and you have that faint smile. Well, we knew the person that preceded you. I don't feel like when you make eye contact, I don't feel like we know this person. I don't speak with Lori, but my sister Janice, her mother, does every week. And, I'm talking with Janice. She just relays Lori is still in her delusion. And I do think, not being a psychiatrist, but I think that would be inevitable, because if she were to accept what actually happened, how could she live with that? I mean, how could she live with what actually occurred? So she almost has to put up this wall to prevent herself from knowing that truth and continue to believe whatever false thing she believed when she did this. The Cox and Shiflett families also put out a joint statement. Now, this would be the Coxes are Lori's parents. I don't know if her brother Adam was involved in this. There have been some disagreements, I think, between the family. Adam, very early on, came more on the side of the victims and not believing his sister. And this also came from, I assume, Summer Shiflett, Lori's sister, who had that very emotional phone call with Lori when she was in the jail. And here's what they said. We want to thank each person that has offered kindness, support, and prayers on behalf of our family and the other victims' families. That support is deeply felt and appreciated. And they thanked the jury, they thanked law enforcement, the attorneys, the judge. They said, we fully accept the determined decision in our justice system. We understand this is just one step toward justice for the beloved victims in this case. And I want you to think about how difficult this is for them, because they're on both sides of the equation, the victims and the defendant. They're on both sides because they're the mother of the defendant, the sister of the defendant, the father of the defendant, and at the same time, the grandparents, the aunt of two children who were killed. This is very, very difficult position. And they say, despite today's verdict, we are left with our grief and sorrow over the loss of Tylee and JJ, who are irreplaceable. Our family will always feel this loss and will never be the same. We will continue to honor their memories to the best of our ability. We send our deepest sympathy to Tammy's family and Charles's family, who have also been devastated by the loss of Tammy and Charles, who were also irreplaceable. These are beautifully written. I mean, they really are. And so hard. I mean, I don't think we can even begin to appreciate how difficult this is for them. We share your grief and offer our heartfelt prayers for healing for all who have been hurt by these horrific crimes. We hope this outcome can offer you a measure of peace and comfort. We will continue to firmly put our faith in Jesus Christ and seek for his mercy and grace for all of those involved. Really very, very moving, I think, and especially when you put it in context for what exactly they've had to deal with. Tammy Daybell's parents and family also put out a statement. I do not believe Chad's children were involved in this, but I couldn't find an exact answer to that. And what they said was, what a beautiful day to receive the news of Lori's convictions. Thank you to everyone that had a part in bringing the truth to light. We're especially grateful to the detectives, the jury, Judge Boyce, and the prosecution team. We thank you for your tireless efforts. We will move forward with renewed energy and faith that justice will be fully served. We anticipate next steps will be swift resolution of the case at hand. And there was more to it as well. Brandon Boudreaux, I saved his for last because I thought his statement was really, really good. And I'm only going to read you 2 paragraphs from it because it was kind of lengthy. He said, but I thought it was very thoughtful, and he had a lot of deep things that he said in it from the Boudreaux family. He said, we recognize that people are not inherently good or evil. It's what makes these tragic events so much harder for those of us who were all affected by these crimes. While we do not glory in any conviction, we recognize the importance of holding accountable those who would commit such terrible atrocities. Tylee and JJ will be forever missed. They are precious and unique and will always be loved. Lastly, many people who have been involved in these events, some by choice and others perhaps not, regardless of how they are involved, we encourage all to consider that this world is already so full of divisiveness. We advocate for forgiveness and privacy where possible. We live by the hope that the worst part of our lives does not become who we are. We do not condone nor encourage less prosecution for those accountable, but instead encourage true change and accountability for those involved. We hope for sincere forgiveness for those affected, that they might not carry the burden of hatred with the pain of loss. John 15:12, this is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. I thought that was just profound, really. I thought it was very deep. I was very impressed by that. And Brandon Boudreaux, we have a big update on Brandon Boudreaux. Marlon, I appreciate that. Yes, please do hit the like button. I am very appreciative of that if you do. So we have a big update. The news broke that a full year ago, Lori Vallow Daybell was indicted for the shooting of Brandon Boudreaux. Now, it wasn't a shooting of him. I shouldn't say that. It's a shooting at him. You may remember he was driving home, Jeep parked near his house, back window rolls down, gun with a silencer sticks out and shoots him, hits his car, but does not hit or hurt Brandon Boudreaux. So Lori, apparently, according to what's been leaked to several media outlets, was indicted for conspiracy to murder Brandon Boudreaux. Not actual murder, since he wasn't hurt, but conspiracy to murder him. It wasn't a surprise, really. The evidence they had on that was quite strong. But Vallow and her late brother, Alex Cox, are said to have agreed that at least one of them or another would engage in conduct constituting the offense of first-degree premeditated murder. You may remember that video of Lori when she went to the storage unit, and she was seen putting a tire and a seat into the storage locker, and then the next day taking it out on the exact days, the day of and then the day after the shooting at Brandon Boudreaux. And the prosecution says that's because you can't roll the window of the Jeep all the way down if you've got the tire there. You have to take it off. Alex wanted to get in the back and shoot. He could only do that if the seat had been removed. But one of the things you may be wondering is, what about Chad Daybell? Because initially it was believed that the person in the video with Lori who was taking the tire and the seat was Alex Cox. But many people believe, after reviewing it, that that wasn't Alex Cox, that was Chad Daybell who was with Lori. And if so, I would think there may need to be an expansion of that it may eventually include Chad Daybell. But the statements that were leaked was that the indictment was for Lori and Alex Cox. It didn't Chad Daybell. We may just not have been leaked, or then again, maybe they thought that that video showed Lori and Alex, but not Lori and Chad. There were also some other things that Lori did that could have implicated her. So there may be more evidence against her than against Chad. Just putting a tire into a storage unit may not be enough for Chad if there's no evidence he had any idea of what was going on. There was also no mention of Melanie Boudreau, now Melanie Boudreau Pawlowski. And this may be the reason. It could be that she was indicted and we just don't know about it yet, or it could be that there was no return of the indictment against her, or even that they did get an indictment against her. I think the reason that people think of Melanie Boudreau is she is the one who would have the most direct motive to shoot and kill Brandon Boudreau. She talked about the evil spirits. Well, let me correct that. There was discussion about the evil spirits in her children, and she was said to be resigned to her kids being evil spirits. There was money involved because Brandon Boudreau had a life insurance policy. There was money involved in their bitter divorce that was going on. There was custody, and who would get custody? Although if you had evil spirits in your children, maybe you wouldn't want custody. Apparently they were fighting that. But I think the difference is that the evidence we have isn't directly from Melanie Boudreau. I don't know if there is evidence that we just don't know about yet, but the evidence we have was Lori talking about what Melanie said, not Melanie talking about it. What got brought up at trial, which made sense, right? This is the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell, not the trial of Melanie Pawlowski. So it makes sense. But for example, Lori said, what's Blake's percentage? Blake was Melanie Boudreau's son. He drew 3 crosses on the wall in his bedroom. We just finished painting over them like he was marking it for the dark side to find him. And Chad said, Blake's a 7. I took my sword of life and sliced his aura vertically in several places. You should be able to now rip and burn it. I also decreased his pain tolerance to 1% and greatly increased his pain. Just sick. His desire to depart is at 80%. So, but notice, this is Lori talking about Melanie's kids, but it's not Melanie writing about Melanie's kids. The same thing happened on the 26th. Lori says, Mel knew, she called me, she felt the real Brighton, that's her child, last night and knew she was different. She was told I didn't want to tell her. She's taking it well and knows it is part of a big plan. These are chilling because they suggest that maybe Melanie was about to get on board with believing her own children were evil spirits, but it didn't happen. And we don't have any evidence that Melanie thought that, only that Lori thought that Melanie thought that. There was also discussing a message from God to Melanie about wanting to speed things up a bit. But again, that's a little bit vague. Lori also suggested that Melanie's child Braxy had put holes in the walls and doors and definitely had demons helping her, probably 1,000. And so we are both so tired of taking care of demons. We are weary. Please ask the Lord to take them. All of that is very frightening and suggestive, but it's not something that came from Melanie Boudreau Pawlowski. Therefore, that may be why, or like I say, it could be that she's been indicted and we just don't know about it yet. Or it could be that there just wasn't evidence that she herself knew anything about this. She might have had reason, but she may not have actually acted or been any part of it. Remember too, there was that one comment about the money from Melanie would be available for everyone. Lori said that too. I think it was Zulema or maybe Audrey. I can't remember. Said that to one, I think Zulema. And Zulema told that to Melanie, and Melanie said, well, I'm disappointed that they would say that. The fact that my money from the divorce, my money would belong to everybody. And so it may be that Melanie wasn't really on board, that they thought she was, and she was less so. So I have a special request of y'all, and that is I would love to interview one of the jurors from the trial. If you know of someone who was a juror on the trial, I'm very fair, and on this channel, we like to understand things and we like to understand legal cases. It would be a very safe place to talk. We'd be very fair, and I'd just like to learn. I have questions, and I'd love to know about their experience. So if you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, I would really be interested in interviewing one of the jurors. We also got new information on Bryan Kohberger. You may know this case as the Idaho 4 or the Moscow 4. It's the 4 college students who were stabbed to death in the middle of the night, and Bryan Kohberger has been arrested and charged with those murders. He is going to be in court on Monday. That's sort of a surprise. There was going to be a preliminary hearing. They'd set 4 days aside for that in June. Instead, what happened was they took the case to a grand jury and got an indictment. So the prosecution has to show its evidence somewhere. It could be at the indictment, or it could be at a preliminary hearing. So the initial plan had been to do it at a preliminary hearing, but meanwhile, they did it in the indictment, so there's not a need for that preliminary hearing. So what's going to happen on Monday is Bryan Kohberger is going to enter his plea. I can feel fairly confident in saying this is going to be a not guilty plea. I don't think there's any surprise about that. I mean, you can hardly plead guilty to a death penalty case with no deal at all. So I think clearly he's going to say not guilty. In one sense, this is bad news for the public because there's not going to be as much information disclosed in advance of trial, because we would have gotten more information, I think, from the preliminary hearing than we will get on Monday or at any other time. So it makes trial even more important in terms of what the public finds out. And it means it'll take longer for us to get that information. But it also may mean that trial will happen a little sooner. We don't know. We will definitely be talking about that case on Monday. Now, I have 3 videos ready to go. I need an editor. I'm just not fast at video editing. But I have 3 videos ready to go, but not fully edited yet, on other cases that I want to show you. I have no doubt that you are going to be really interested in these cases. We're going to be talking about, I saw somebody mentioned in the chat, Curry Richens. Oh yes, definitely talking about that. And these are all cases that we haven't already talked about that we're going to cover or talk about on the channel. These are new ones that we haven't talked about before. So I think I'm very excited to see what you think about these cases. I definitely want your input on these. I'm going to drop these videos as premieres. So what that means is it'll actually have a chat. These are short. These are 8 minutes. So I'm going to do a 5-minute wind up, which is, well, if you're there on time, they'll be like, doo-doo-doo. But I'm going to give everybody time to get there because it's only 8 minutes. That's all the chat we're going to have is the 5-minute lead up and then the 8 minutes that will be open during the video. After that, of course, I can read your comments, but it won't be live. It won't be interactive at that point. So I really wanted to talk to you about that. So hit the subscribe button so you can get there in plenty of time. I also put a note in the community, on the community page, about when we're going to do it, so nobody will miss it, because I really want to interact and hear what you have to say, what you think about the cases and what you want to cover. That's super important. So I will next be talking, I'll be doing that. Maybe I can get it done tomorrow. I really hope I can. But if not, I will definitely be seeing you on Friday at 7 o'clock for our live stream. So I look forward to that.